The wind outside was sharp like knives. It howled across the frozen land and rattled the thin walls of the soldier's tent. Inside, the humans sat on the cold ground, a small heater glowing faintly near his feet. His hands were wrapped around a tin cup of lukewarm tea. He had been alone here for days. The snowstorm had trapped him on this side of the ridge. The white world outside seemed endless and empty. Yet something about tonight felt different. He listened to the storm, each gust pressing against the tent as if trying to push inside. The shadows flickered with every sway of the fabric. He had learned to live with the silence and the cold. But a strange unease had begun to grow in his chest, as if the storm carried something more than wind and snow. He tried to ignore it, sipping his tea slowly. Then, a faint sound broke through the noise. It was not the wind, not the crack of ice shifting. It was softer, uneven, almost like footsteps. He frowned and set his cup down. His hand moved to the rifle lying beside him. The sound came again, closer this time. Crunch, crunch. His breath slowed, his eyes fixed on the flap of the tent. Without warning, the flap moved, and a small figure stumbled inside. Snow fell from her hair and shoulders as she crossed the threshold. She was tiny, no taller than his chest. Her skin a pale shade of blue, her clothes ragged and thin. She was shaking so badly that her knees knocked together. Her large eyes were wide with fear, and her lips were almost colorless from the cold. The soldier raised his weapon in instinct, but she didn't try to attack. Instead, she lifted her trembling hands into the air in a sign of surrender. Her breathing was quick and shallow, each exhale a small cloud in the freezing air. For a second, neither of them moved. The only sound was the storm outside. Then, in a weak, cracking voice, she spoke, "Please. They'll find me." Her words were barely louder than the wind, and before he could ask who she meant, her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the frozen ground inside his tent. He looked down at her, torn between caution and instinct. She was alien, her appearance unlike any human he had seen. Yet she looked fragile, too fragile to be a threat. He could see the outlines of her bones under her skin, and her hands were stiff from frostbite. The heat from his small heater was barely reaching her where she lay. He stepped closer, rifle still in hand. But his other reached down to shake her shoulder gently. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, then closed again. Her breathing was shallow. She was close to freezing to death. The soldier glanced toward the storm, knowing it would be safer to send her back out before she brought trouble to him. But something inside him resisted the thought. He had seen enough suffering in his life to know what it looked like. And here it was, lying helpless in front of him. With a quiet sigh, he set his weapon aside and pulled one of his blankets free. He wrapped it around her small body, feeling the icy chill of her skin even through the fabric. She shivered, curling in on herself as he tucked the blanket tighter around her. He poured some water from his canteen into a small metal cup and warmed it by the heater. After a moment, he knelt beside her and touched the rim of the cup to her lips. She drank in tiny sips, her eyes half opening to meet his gaze. There was fear there, but also a glimmer of something else, maybe hope, maybe disbelief. The storm outside grew louder, masking them from whatever dangers might be in the dark. Still, he knew the risk. If she had enemies chasing her, they might already be searching. Yet the way she clung to the blanket, the way her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly as the warmth reached her, told him he had made the right choice for now. He sat back, watching her try to form words. Her voice was rough, breaking between breaths. "I ran. I couldn't stay. She trailed off, her eyelids heavy, exhaustion pulling her down. The soldier didn't press her for more, not tonight. He knew the questions could wait until morning. For now, she needed warmth, food, and rest. He adjusted the heater so its glow reached her better, then sat close enough to shield her from the draft creeping through the seams of the tent. Minutes passed in silence, except for the wind. Her shivering began to ease. Her breathing slowed. And though she still looked far from safe, some of the tension in her face faded. He watched the snow pile up against the outside of the tent, wondering who they were and how far behind her they might be. His mind kept circling back to one thought: he was now part of her flight, whether he liked it or not, at last. She whispered something he almost didn't catch. "Thank you." It was faint, almost swallowed by the storm, but it reached him. He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. Outside, the world remained a frozen nightmare, but inside the small tent, for a short moment, there was a fragile warmth between two strangers who had no idea what the next hours would bring. The storm outside had not eased. If anything, the wind seemed stronger. It pushed against the tent walls, making them bow inward with each heavy gust. The soldier sat in silence, his eyes on the small, alien girl who lay wrapped in his blanket. Her breathing was uneven, her lips still pale from the cold. He had given her as much warmth as he could. But the question still lingered in his mind: should he keep her here or send her out before danger followed her in? He knew how the battlefield worked. Mercy could get you killed. One wrong choice could lead an enemy right to your position. Yet, when he looked at her, so small and fragile, he found it impossible to picture her as a threat. She was nothing like the soldiers he had fought before. Her hands were too thin, her shoulders too slight, even her voice, when she had spoken earlier, had carried no anger, only fear. The heater gave off a faint orange glow, casting long shadows against the fabric walls. He poured another small cup of water and held it near her lips. She stirred, opening her eyes, just enough to drink. Her gaze flickered up to meet his, and for the first time, he noticed the faint shimmer of tears there. She swallowed the water slowly before whispering something in a hoarse voice. "Why? Why are you helping me?" The soldier didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over to adjust the blanket around her shoulders. "Because you're freezing," he said finally, keeping his tone steady. "And no one deserves to die like that." Her eyes lingered on him, as if she were trying to understand the meaning behind his words. She shifted slightly, still shivering under the blanket. "I thought humans would kill me," she murmured, her voice weak. He almost smiled, though it was a sad sort of smile. "Not tonight," he said. Outside, the sound of the wind changed, and his body tensed instantly. Years of instinct warning him something was different. He reached for his rifle and froze. There it was, again, soft, steady crunching in the snow. Footsteps, moving closer. His eyes met hers, and he saw her freeze too, her breath catching, her small hands clutching the blanket tighter. He quickly turned off the heater, plunging the tent into near darkness. Only a thin strip of moonlight filtered in through the flap. He gestured for her to be silent. She nodded quickly and pulled the blanket over her head. Curling into a small bundle on the floor, the temperature dropped almost instantly without the heater, but it was worth it. Their heat signature would be harder to detect. The footsteps grew louder. He could hear faint voices now, 2 of them, speaking in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was enough: searching, questioning, hunting. His hand tightened on his weapon as the shadows moved past the tent. Then the voices stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. He could sense them just outside. His finger rested against the trigger, ready to fire if the flap moved inside the blanket. He could hear the girl's breathing quicken, almost trembling as much from fear as from the cold. One of the voices muttered something, a low growl of words, and for a moment, he thought they would come in. His muscles tensed, his heart pounded, but then, slowly, the sound of boots crunching in the snow began again, fading away into the storm. He kept still for a while longer, waiting to be certain they were gone. When he finally relaxed his grip on the rifle, he turned the heater back on. The faint warmth returned to the air, and the girl's head peeked out from under the blanket. her wide eyes locking on his. "They were looking for me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I guessed," he replied. Setting his rifle aside again, "You saved me," she said quietly, almost as if she was still trying to believe it. He didn't know what to say to that. He just gave a short nod, inside. He knew it had been a risk, but in that moment, it felt like the only right thing to do. He didn't know who she was running from, or why they wanted her. But he knew one thing: if they had found her tonight, she wouldn't have survived. The girl shifted under the blanket, pulling it tighter around herself. "I don't have anyone left," she said after a pause, her voice carrying both exhaustion and a kind of empty sadness. "They took me from my home, from my people." The soldier listened in silence, not pushing for more. She didn't need to spill everything tonight, but he could hear the truth in her tone. She was alone, completely alone, and now, for reasons he didn't fully understand. She had found her way into his tent, into his life. Outside, the storm kept raging, but inside, the small space between them felt different now, less like two strangers caught in the cold, and more like two survivors sharing the same fragile warmth. The soldier didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but as he watched her close her eyes again, pulling the blanket up to her chin, he realized he had already made his decision. He wasn't going to let her freeze or be taken. Not while he was here. The night felt longer than usual. The wind outside still screamed like some angry creature. But now there was another sound mixed in, faint and dangerous. The soldier stayed still, listening, every sense alert. The alien girl lay curled up under the blanket, only her small face showing. Her eyes were half open, fear hiding deep inside them. She could hear it too. The muffled crunch of footsteps in the snow, slow and careful. He reached over and switched off the heater again. The warm glow vanished, leaving the tent in darkness. The sudden cold wrapped around them like ice water. But the soldier knew they could not risk being found without the heater. The tent gave off less heat for patrol scanners to pick up. He moved silently, lowering his breathing, his rifle in his hands once more. The girl understood without him saying anything. She pulled the blanket completely over her head, making herself as small as possible. He could hear her breathing faster, trying not to make any sound. The footsteps outside grew louder, and now voices followed, two of them, speaking in a language the soldier didn't know, but their tone told him everything. They were hunting, scanning the area, searching for someone who had escaped. He glanced at the tent flap, watching the faint outline of shadows pass by. Then the voices stopped right outside. The sound of snow crunching ceased. The silence was worse than the noise. The soldier tightened his grip on the rifle, his finger resting near the trigger. His whole body tensed like a spring ready to snap. Under the blanket, the girl's breathing became shallow and quick. He could almost feel the fear radiating from her. One voice spoke, low and suspicious. And then there was the sound of a hand brushing against the outside of the tent. He didn't move, didn't even blink. The world seemed to hold its breath. If they unzipped the flap, there would be no choice but to fight. But just as suddenly, the sound shifted, boots crunching on snow again, moving away slowly at first, then fading into the storm. The soldier stayed still for another long moment, making sure it wasn't a trick. Finally, when the silence returned and the only sound was the wind, he relaxed slightly. He turned the heater back on, and the weak warmth began to creep into the seb. Wee warmth began to creep into air again. The alien girl slowly pulled the blanket away from her face, her wide eyes still fixed on him. "They were here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," he said simply, keeping his tone calm. "They would have taken me," she added, her voice small. "Not while you're in my tent," he replied without thinking. Her lips trembled, and she looked down, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. There was a pause before she said, "You didn't have to do that. I did," he answered, his voice quiet but firm. She stared at him for a moment longer. And then a small tear rolled down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, as if she didn't want him to see. The soldier glanced at the tent flap again, his mind already running through possibilities. The patrol had been close, too close. They might come back. Or they might already know which direction she had gone. Staying here was dangerous, but moving in the middle of the storm was also a risk. "You can't stay here long," he finally said. "They'll keep looking." Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "If I leave, I'll die," she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I guess you're not leaving." She blinked at him, a mix of relief and disbelief crossing her face. "Why?" she asked again, as if she still couldn't understand. "Because I've already decided," he said, "and I don't change my mind once I do." The heater hummed quietly between them, the shadows from its glow flickering across the tent walls. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their tracks. But the soldier knew it wouldn't hide them forever. For the rest of the night, he stayed half awake, his rifle always within reach. The alien girl eventually drifted into a restless sleep, her small frame trembling now and then. Even in her dreams, he kept glancing at her, at the way her face softened when she slept. And he wondered how someone so young had survived whatever horrors had chased her here. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, more decisions. But for now, they were alive, safe for the moment. And that would have to be enough. The soldier didn't realize it yet. But from the moment she had stepped into his tent, his life had already begun to change. And nothing, no storm, no patrol, no enemy was going to undo that choice. The storm finally began to calm, though the air outside was still bitterly cold. The soldier sat near the heater, his eyes half on the alien girl, half on the tent flap. The danger from the patrol still felt close. He could not shake the memory of the footsteps outside, but for now, the only sound was the faint hum of the heater and the wind dying down. The girl slowly sat up, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was messy, small strands sticking to her face from where the snow had melted earlier. She looked at him for a long time before speaking, her voice quiet. "You want to know why?" "They're after me." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured a little water into the metal cup and handed it to her. She took it with both hands, holding it close for warmth before sipping slowly. After a pause, she began, "I lived on a farming colony, small, quiet." Her eyes dropped to the ground as she spoke. "We grew food, traded with passing ships. Nothing special." Her voice changed, becoming tighter. Then one night, ships came. Not to trade, she swallowed hard. They took people. My parents, my brother, Kay. She closed her eyes as if the memory itself hurt to keep inside. They made us work. Long hours. No rest if you slowed down. You were punished. The soldier didn't interrupt. He could hear in her voice that it took strength just to say the words. She stared into the steam rising from the cup, her small hands trembling. I ran when the storm came. They couldn't see me in the snow. She glanced up at him now. I didn't even know where I was going. I just kept moving until I saw the shape of your tent. He leaned back slightly, taking it in. He had seen the cruelty of war, but her story was different. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even someone caught in a fight by accident. She had been taken on purpose. Used until she couldn't work anymore. For a while, they sat in silence, the heater warming the space between them. She broke it again, her voice softer this time. Why did you help me? I've heard stories. Humans don't help people like me. He met her eyes and said, I don't care what you are. I care that you're alive. Her lips pressed together, and for a moment she seemed unsure how to respond. Finally she whispered, "No one has said that to me before." The soldier shifted his gaze toward the tent wall, listening again for any sound outside. But the storm had done a good job of covering their tracks. Still, he knew they couldn't stay here for long. The patrol would come back. "Maybe with more people next time. You're not safe here," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we move." Her brow furrowed. "Where?" "There's a human outpost," he explained. "It's 2 days away through rough ground. But if we get there, they'll protect you." She hesitated. "And you? Will you leave me there?" He thought about it for a moment before answering. "Let's get you there first, then we'll see." Something flickered in her eyes at his words. Hope, but also fear. She didn't want to be alone again. He could see it in the way her hands tightened around the cup, as if she was holding on to more than just the warmth. He reached over, pulling the blanket a little tighter around her. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she sat still, watching him, as if trying to figure out what kind of man he really was. He didn't tell her that part of him had already decided he wasn't going to leave her to face the galaxy alone. But he also didn't want to promise something he might not be able to keep. The night grew quieter, the wind outside dropping. To a low whistle, the heater filled the small tent with a steady, gentle heat. She leaned back slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing. He noticed the way her breathing slowed, her eyes growing heavy. Before she drifted to sleep, she said, "One last thing," her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not sending me back out there." He didn't answer, just gave a small nod, but inside, the decision he had made earlier settled deeper. Whatever trouble she had brought into his tent, he was going to see it through. Tomorrow would be dangerous. The journey would be hard, but for now, she was safe, and he would make sure it stayed that way. The first light of morning was weak, a pale glow that barely touched the white snow outside. The storm had passed, but the cold was sharper than ever. The soldier unzipped the tent just enough to look out, his eyes scanning the horizon. The land was quiet, too quiet, but he knew better than to trust the stillness. Danger often hid in silence. Inside the tent, the alien girl stirred under the blanket, her eyes opening slowly. She looked tired. Her cheeks slightly warmer now, but still pale. "Is it morning?" she asked softly, her voice rough from sleep. He nodded and began packing his gear. She watched him for a moment, then sat up, keeping the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "We're leaving?" "Yes," he said, without looking up. "We need to move before they start searching this area again." He packed the small heater into his bag, then checked his rifle. His movements were quick and practiced. She could tell he was preparing for trouble. Her hands clutched the blanket tighter. "What if they find us?" "Then we deal with it," he replied simply, his tone calm but firm. It wasn't meant to scare her. But he didn't want to lie either. She nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to the ground. He handed her a small piece of dried food. She took it, nibbling carefully. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her moving. After a few minutes, they stepped out into the snow. The cold hit them instantly, the wind carrying sharp bites of ice against their faces. He pulled his hood tighter. She followed closely behind, her small footprints matching his larger ones. The land stretched out endlessly in front of them, broken only by the shapes of distant hills and jagged rocks. Every step crunched in the snow, the sound carrying far in the still air. They didn't speak much, both focused on moving quickly. It was near midday when he heard a deep, distant hum, faint but growing louder. He stopped instantly, raising his hand for her to do the same. She froze, her eyes scanning the sky. A dark shape appeared on the horizon, moving low and slow, a patrol vehicle. Her breathing quickened. "It's them," she whispered. "Stay low," he said, guiding her toward a cluster of rocks. They crouched behind the jagged stone, The hum grew louder until the patrol passed within sight. The soldier kept still, his hand on his weapon. The girl pressed against the rocks, her shoulders shaking. The vehicle slowed for a moment, its searchlight sweeping across the snow. The beam passed dangerously close to their hiding place. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Finally, the vehicle continued forward, the sound fading into the distance. Only when it was gone did she exhale, her small voice breaking. "I thought they saw us. They didn't," he said, standing again, "but they're looking harder now." They continued on. But the air between them felt heavier. The girl stayed even closer to him, almost stepping on his heels. The soldier noticed but didn't say anything. He understood fear made people cling to whatever safety they could find. By the time the sun began to sink, the cold was worse. Their breaths hanging in the air like smoke. They found a shallow ditch partly covered by snow and decided to rest. There for the night, it wasn't much, but it would keep the wind off them. As he set up a small fire hidden between the rocks, she sat beside him, her knees pulled to her chest. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. He glanced at her. "We've been through this." "No," she said, shaking her head. "I mean, you don't even know me. You could leave me and go on alone. You'd be safer." He paused, looking at her for a long moment. Before saying, "I made a choice, and I don't walk away from it," her eyes softened, though she still looked uncertain, back in the camp. No one cared what happened to us, not even the other workers. Everyone just tried to survive alone. She hesitated, her voice dropping. "It feels strange." Having someone care, he didn't reply, just gave a small nod. The fire crackled. Quietly between them, they shared a little food, and when the cold became too much, she moved closer to him, her small frame curling beside his for warmth. He didn't push her away. They both needed the heat to survive the night. Somewhere in the dark, far away, an engine rumbled. He froze. Listening, the sound faded quickly. But it was a reminder that danger was still out there, and tomorrow they would have to move even faster. The girl, half asleep now, whispered something he almost didn't catch. "You feel like the sun." It was quiet, barely a breath, but it stayed in his mind long after she drifted off. He stared into the fire, knowing that the road ahead would be dangerous, but also knowing he would see it through. The morning came without sunlight. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air was colder than the night before. The soldier woke. First, brushing the thin layer of frost from his jacket, his breath hung in the air as he listened to the stillness. The alien girl was still asleep, curled up under the blanket, her small frame barely moving with each slow breath. He didn't wake her right away. Instead, he checked the horizon, scanning for movement. There was nothing yet, but his gut told him they were still being hunted. He packed up their small fire pit, covered the traces, and finally knelt beside her, gently touching her shoulder. "We have to move," he said quietly. Her eyes opened slowly. She looked tired, but when she saw his expression, she knew this wasn't a morning for questions. She nodded and pulled the blanket tighter around herself before getting to her feet. Her legs wobbled a little, but she steadied herself. The snow was harder today, the wind sharp and dry. It bit at their skin as they moved. The soldier led the way, his boots leaving deep prints in the frozen ground. The girl followed close behind, stepping where he stepped. They spoke little, their breath fogging the air between them. By midday, they reached a stretch of open ground. Number rocks, no trees, only snow and ice. Crossing it would be dangerous. They would be exposed, but going around would take too long. The soldier studied the horizon, then looked back at her. "We move fast here," he said, "no stopping." She nodded, her eyes showing she understood. They stepped out into the open. The crunch of snow underfoot seemed too loud in the emptiness. Every few seconds he glanced around, scanning the distance halfway across. The sound came faint at first, then louder, the mechanical hum of drones. His eyes shot upward. 3. Dark shapes were moving fast in the sky, sweeping back and forth like predators searching for prey. "Run," he said sharply. She didn't hesitate. They moved as quickly as the snow allowed. The drones passed overhead once, then turned. There. Sensors glowing faintly red. A warning in the cold air. The soldier's mind raced. They couldn't outrun machines in the open. He spotted a small ridge of ice ahead and pulled her toward it. They dove behind the frozen wall, just as a beam of scanning light swept over the snow where they had been. She was breathing hard, her small hands clutching his arm. The drones hovered for a long moment, scanning the area. One of them moved closer, its engine whining. The soldier reached for his rifle, but didn't fire. He knew the shot would give them away completely. Instead, he waited, the freezing air burning in his lungs. At last, the drones moved on, the sound of their engines fading into the distance. The girl let out a shaky breath. "I thought they saw us," she whispered. He gave a short nod. Close enough. They didn't stop again until the light began to fade. The cold deepened as the sky darkened. They found shelter under a rocky ledge, the stone blocking some of the wind. He built a small, hidden fire, using only a little fuel to keep it from being seen. She sat close to it, holding her hands over the faint flame. "How far now?" she asked. "By tomorrow night, we should see the outpost lights," he said. She nodded, her gaze distant. Then she leaned back against the rock, her eyes half closed. After a long silence, she spoke again, her voice low. "I've never felt safe with anyone." Until now, he looked at her, but didn't reply right away. There was a truth in her words that caught him off guard. Finally, he said, "You're under my protection. As long as you're with me, no one touches you." She smiled faintly, though. Her eyes were still tired. "Then I'll stay with you," she said simply, as the night settled in. The fire's glow flickered against the rocks. The wind howled above them, but inside their small shelter, the cold seemed to fade. They sat together in silence, both knowing that tomorrow would decide everything. The journey would end at the outpost door, with the hunters finally catching up. But for now, they had made it one more day. And that was enough. The night passed slowly. The soldier kept waking every hour, listening for sounds beyond the wind, each time he opened his eyes. The alien girl was still curled beside him, sleeping lightly, her small breaths forming little clouds in the cold air. By the time the pale light of morning came, he was already awake, tightening the straps on his pack. The girl stirred when she felt the movement. She rubbed her eyes, her voice still soft with sleep. "Is it today?" "Yes," he said. "If we keep moving, we'll reach the outpost by night." There was no smile in his voice, only focus. He knew the hardest part might still be ahead. They left their rocky shelter and began walking again. The ground was rough here, patches of ice mixed with deep snow. Every step was slow. The wind cut against their faces, but they kept moving. The soldiers scanned the horizon often, each time expecting to see the shapes of patrols or drones. Hours passed, and then, in the far distance, a faint glow appeared. It was weak under the daylight, but he knew what it was: the outpost lights. Relief touched his chest for the first time in days. But it was short-lived, because he also saw movement on the right. Dark figures coming over the snow. "Down," he ordered quickly. They dropped behind a snowbank, the girl's eyes wide. "Who is it?" she whispered. "Not friendly," he said, his voice low. The figures were moving fast, 6 of them, armed and spread out, heading straight for the path that would lead to the outpost. There was no way to go around without losing too much time. The soldier thought fast, then pulled her closer. "Stay behind me no matter what," he said. She nodded. Her hands gripping the edge of his coat, they moved along the snowbank, trying to stay low. But the hunters spotted them. Shouts rang out. The soldier swung his rifle into position. Firing short bursts, the sound cracked through the cold air. The girl stayed crouched, her breath quick and shaky. The enemy fired back. Bullets and energy beams cutting the snow into bursts of white powder. One of the hunters rushed closer. The soldier met him head-on, knocking him down with a hard strike before firing again. Another went down, but the rest kept coming. They were close now, too close. The girl cried out when one of them lunged toward her. The soldier turned sharply, shooting the attacker before he could touch her. In the chaos, the last two hunters began to retreat. Maybe deciding it wasn't worth the fight, the soldier didn't chase them. His only thought was getting her to safety. He grabbed her hand and pulled her forward. "Run," he said. They ran across the open snow. The outpost's lights growing. Brighter with each step by the time they reached the gates. The human guards were already moving toward them, weapons ready. One of them shouted, "Who's with you?" "She's under my protection." The soldier called back, his voice firm. The gates opened, and they stepped inside, the sudden sense of security almost overwhelming after days in the cold. Inside, warmth hit them immediately. She was given blankets, food, and water. She sat at a table, still shaking from the fight, her eyes following him as he spoke with the guards. When he finally came over to her, she looked up, her voice trembling. I thought I was going to die." He sat down beside her, his voice steady. "Not while I'm here." Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. "No one's ever said that to me," she whispered. "No one's ever meant it." "I mean it," he said simply. She reached out, her small hand resting over his. Then, "Don't leave." He looked at her for a moment, and the decision was already made. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And in that moment, the cold outside no longer mattered. The storm, the danger, the long journey, all of it had led here. And as far as he was concerned, she was safe now, and she would stay that way as long as he was alive.